etc. You're with Julian on the brown note. Is England and Australia over? Or are they finished? The two countries I've lived in for virtually my entire life, I don't think have gotten one iota better that whole time, except for a couple of very brief periods. And both of those periods were Labour governments, both in the UK and in Australia. And the reason is they won't stop voting Tory. The quality of life in both countries has nosedived. In the UK, we had Margaret Thatcher, and at the time, those hated 18 years of Tory rule, I just didn't think it would ever be repeated. Not only has England never escaped from it, it would vote for it again tomorrow and has done 3 prime ministers in a row, each progressively worse than the last. Life progressively worse each time. And now Boris Johnson. And no one will ever tell you, none of the voters that vote for these Tories will ever tell you that life was actually better under Labour. In Australia and in England, demonstrably. The economy was better. Society was better. People were even nicer. Government functioned better. All of these things metrically are true. By any metric, the best economic period during the last 30 years wasn't under John Howard, and it sure as hell wasn't under the ever-declining fortunes of the current mob. It was the years of Labour. And any chance we've had at getting near a Labour government that might actually make life better is stymied, and we have 3 elements in both countries that are killing us. The Murdoch press and their acolytes. In Australia, radio stations like 2GB, in the UK, fellow newspapers like the Daily Mail, actually in Australia, the Sydney Morning Herald, the chief cheerleader for the Liberal Party, and that's a state of decline that's dismal, isn't it? So we have the Murdoch Party, we have the Tory Party in the UK called the Conservative Party, in Australia called the Liberal Party. But the most important element is the public. And no matter how bad things are, they will continue to vote over and over, like in some Stockholm syndrome, where they have to vote. Like last week I spoke about domestic violence and gaslighting and how people can't leave because they're broken into this shell of a ghost of a person. It's like the countries are. They can't escape this horrible curse that's made everything about life worse. And they continue to do it. And every time you think it couldn't get better, we end up with Scott Morrison. We end up with Boris Johnson. And I look at comparable countries and they aren't doing what we're doing. The next most comparable Murdoch country is America. America had 8 years of a black Democratic president. He wasn't allowed to do next to anything, but life was better. And now they've voted in a guy that is producing the most progressive platform out of nowhere in probably since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's actually putting forward some pretty progressive ideals, and their country's nicer, and Rupert Murdoch is nowhere to be found. Canada's had Justin for years. They ditched their conservatives. New Zealand, look at New Zealand. How far ahead are they on us? We have nothing here that isn't getting worse. We are saddled with now the second highest household debt in the world. Because our economy in Australia is halls and mirrors. It's propped up by debt. It's destroyed by 30 billion a year in negative gearing and franking credits that go into fueling the most overpriced Western housing market on earth, making all of us slaves to other people's mortgages who benefited when things were okay. And the UK, I mean, every time you think it can't get worse, these people voted to leave the European Union. Even Boris Johnson specifically stated in 2013 that the UK needed to leave the European Union to understand that its problems were itself. This is a guy that didn't believe in Brexit at all. Like Trump, he didn't expect to win. But he did, and now he's screwed. Now they have made... Like, the problem they had was the Tory party, since Margaret Thatcher, making everything worse. These people voted because their opportunities had decreased, their way of life had changed, their standard and quality of living and opportunity had gone down. Not any of that because of Europe. All of it because of the Conservative Party, who they keep voting to make their lives even worse. And now they've broken away with this King Arthur sovereignty to get out of Europe. One of the only things that was protecting them from America, who are now going to invade their marketplace and completely reshape the country now that there's no EU protection. Now they have every likelihood of destroying the United Kingdom. Just when you think things can't get any worse, it is likely that Scotland will have a referendum and leave the United Kingdom and go back to Europe. Good on them. I hope they do. I'd join Scotland. I'd give up my British passport and become Scottish if I was allowed to. The English will never not vote Tory. My whole life I've lived under Tory governments. I moved to Australia in 1997, the year that Labour were elected in the United Kingdom after 18 years of Tory rule. When I arrived here, the country was an optimistic, welcoming, friendly, sunny, ecologically minded, helpful towards the poor and needy and refugees country. Then came John Howard, your Margaret Thatcher, a man that bitterly broke society, who came within this is what's so sad, they win these things by fraction, 1% in Brexit. John Howard was a few weeks away from losing an election and we would have been gone with him. And then the Tamper Overboard story, which riven society ever since. And now we've got this very angry, racist half of the country, very sexist, where we've got massive problems with refugees and race and women, where we have an enormous amount of people that deny climate change. The country changed, just the same as the UK changed. And I can't see a way out. Our compadres in other English-speaking Western nations have left us in the dust. They're far more progressive and they're far more left-leaning in their governments and in their social policies and the niceness of the people. What's going to become of us? There's nowhere left for us to go. We'll vote for Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison tomorrow. Everything has got worse. It doesn't matter that it gets worse. These people still vote for them. Our media is obviously leading the charge here, but how stupid are you? How stupid are people allowed to be before you blame them, the voter, for doing this? Most of them are voting to stick it to the left, or the Greenies, or the feminists, or wherever they've been brought up to believe is actually important in their lives. I don't really see a way out. I mean, every time we get close, it gets crucified. Bill Shorten would have made this country a much better place. He had a very strong platform, an excellent policy platform. He was going to take on the big issues like franking credits. And what do you do when the press unites against you? Scott Morrison spends several $100 million on marginal seats of taxpayers' money. Clive Palmer runs $80 million scare campaign in marginal seats in Queensland. And we end up with Scott Morrison. In the UK, they had the revolution that Bernie Sanders was in America with Jeremy Corbyn, the greatest Labour leader of my lifetime. And they killed him. They killed him in the media, in supposedly centrist and left-leaning media, like The Guardian and the BBC, because he wasn't a Blairite, because he dared speak up about things like Palestinian human rights. So the actual bigwigs behind those organisations made sure that they crucified him and called him an anti-Semite and claimed that Labour had this massive problem with Jews that apparently they didn't have before he was leader and don't have after he's leader, which seems a bit weird considering he was never one of the people accused of having any of these problems. So I just don't see a way out. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn was saddled with Brexit. So I do I honestly think the only way out is in England is for Jeremy Corbyn to rise again. Lots of Labour leaders fled Labour to vote for Boris Johnson. Don't believe the hype. 70% in the polls said that they voted to get Brexit done. 2% said that they did it because of Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn never got a fair crack of the whip. No one could have stood up to the Brexit election. That's all that anyone voted for. In Australia, there are 3 people, I think, that would absolutely crucify Scott Morrison and start this long journey back towards making Australia a better place. And there are 3 women, and it has to be a woman for me personally, to take over Anthony Albanese's role. Tanya Plibersek, Penny Wong, or Christina Keneally. I think all 3 of those would win. I don't think Scott... excuse me. I don't think Scott Morrison would know what to do with them. But it's just a sad lament. I've lived my whole life virtually under Tory rule. And it's got worse each year, but they still vote for it. It's just like this never-ending nightmare. This is from Dry Cleaning's debut album, which I featured a couple of weeks ago. New Long Leg and More Big Birds.